established life beyond civilization. Weird.
The weird and the eerie.
I love LA so much. I love the light. In LA, Mulholland Drive is a famous road. And there's much mood.
Wonder where you were going.
There's so many stories about that road. And it's a very kind of dreamy thing to think about. You know, the old story, so many people come here to try to realize their dreams.
About this place. Tell me.
There is no band, and yet we hear a band.
Diane? Camilla. Diane, the car's waiting. This is the girl.
Do not forget that today is Friday.
Where was it?
I hear someone.
There is something I would like to say to you, Susie.
Alright, we are back, and today we're doing everything David Lynch.
If by everything you mean 2 movies.
Right. Hello, everyone. We are Lost Futures, a Mark Fisher podcast, and I'm Steve.
And I'm Marlo.
And today we're talking Curtains and Holes, David Lynch.
This chapter, just a quick overview, going over Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire, continuing, in fact, I believe, the last chapter in his section on the weird, before we transition over to the eerie. And just like I think weirdness can't start without H.P. Lovecraft, it was not complete without talking about David Lynch.
Yeah, I was just listening to our Lovecraft episode, and you were saying that in any other book, they would have put Lovecraft as chapter 7 to kind of bring everything home, but here you're getting David Lynch is where we end up, so yeah. I feel like this is the culmination of all the other chapters.
Like we said, focuses on those 2 movies. Curtains and Holes, the name of this chapter, is explicitly, I mean, we'll kind of get into it. He identifies curtains as an element used in Mulholland Drive to signify certain transitory points, transitions between worlds, transitions between modes of reality, I guess, because frankly, as we'll get into, there's not a clear delineation between worlds. And even less so in Inland Empire, which he identifies with holes. Again, it's a visual thematic that appears in the movie. It also kind of, I think, speaks to the more winding and unclear ways in which that movie plays with reality.
To kind of pull it back a little bit, this David Lynch, if you're not familiar, is a really great director who worked throughout the late 70s into the 80s. Eraserhead was his first major film, got him a lot of awards, and then he made Blue Velvet. He also did Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage, and then Twin Peaks in the early 90s, which has become kind of a huge millennial cult hit as a show. It has this saccharine nostalgia with a murder mystery underneath it. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure a lot of you have, but if you haven't, please go watch it. We're going to do a Patreon episode on Blue Velvet, so tune in for that. But I think what Fisher's getting at here is that David Lynch, as his career progressed, he got more and more weird. He was weird to begin with, and then he got more weird as his career moved in content, but also in the literal place of where he set his movies.
To quote Fisher, Lynch's earlier works, including Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, presented what at first glance could be a superficial coherence. I guess Twin Peaks is maybe the last normal David Lynch, because after that you have
Lost
Highway, which is similar levels of getting away from superficial coherence, I'll say.
And narrative linearity.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain point where David Lynch went from having a off-kilter but pretty clear beginning, middle, and end, internally, logically consistent story to where you then had to say, well, what is your interpretation of the movie? And not like in a, like, oh, is he talking about Watergate or something? But in a, like, literally what the fuck happened in this movie?
Yeah. And it's real fun reading this because he does say Twin Peaks, 1990 to 1991, with a third series currently in production.
Yeah, Netflix, baby.
I watched all 18 hours of the third season of Twin Peaks while I was in a fever, and I think that's the best way to watch the third season of Twin Peaks.
Arrested Development with a fourth series in production.
But I think it's fair to say his movies get more abstract, less linear, and less narratively coherent.
Right. I mean, the classic is, Lost Highway, suddenly the main actor is a different guy, and also they're all treating him like a different character for some reason, and, there's a standard, quote-unquote, like, Freudian dream interpretation of that, and then, as we'll get into more with Mulholland Drive, the two main characters become completely different characters about halfway through the movie, with no in the movie given exposition that would tell you why that such a thing would happen. And then in Inland Empire, no one knows what the fuck happened.
Yeah,
it's about a girl in trouble.
For this essay, I think it definitely works with, as the concluding essay in the weird section, it also works nicely with the previous essay on Philip K. Dick, Time Out of Joint, and World on a Wire, or like Matrix films, because all of those had distinct like hierarchies of reality where one reality is more real than the others. And here he's saying, we finally entered it. We've reached the post-modernity where there is, especially in Inland Empire, where movie and non-movie have blended entirely. And that this, I think he says this in a K-Punk article about this, where he says this really distills the postmodern down to its essence, if there is one, even though it is anti-essence. But yes, it is the postmodern condition.
The essence of not having an essence still is kind of an essence, but we'll let the philosophers argue about that.
Mulholland Drive. What is Mulholland Drive about?
It's not about a girl in trouble. That's what the other movie's about. But it also is about a girl in trouble. But which girl? Yeah, Mulholland Drive, a classic lesbian erotica from the 2001, directed by David Lynch.
Naomi Watts plays Diane Selwyn in the first half of the movie. And she gets brought to LA from a small town, and she has dreams of becoming this big actress, and it's about her adventures of meeting Camilla, who is Rita, because she takes the name Rita Hayworth, who has amnesia because she was attempted to be assassinated in a car and then stumbled into Diane, Naomi Watts' place where she's staying.
Yeah, gets off her plane, whistles, does one of those little whistles like, golly gee, that's sure a big building, and is like, wow, this is Hollywood town, the land where dreams are made out of, living in her rich, absent aunt's house, and she comes home one day to find this lady just hiding in her house, and it's like, who are you? And she's like, I don't remember my name, I don't know who I am. And so they got this mystery to solve.
Right. Who is she?
Yeah.
And why is she hurt? Who's trying to kill her? Because she barely remembers the assassination because the car gets hit, and then she seems to not remember that, and then she stumbles down and into this house. And the assassination happens on Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, in fact, Mulholland Drive is the one detail that she remembers. She says, I think I was going to Mulholland Drive. I think I was at Mulholland Drive. Her one memory is just the kind of phrase Mulholland Drive.
Right. So there's a couple other characters in it. There's the director who is being cuckolded by his wife, and he's the one that Diane is on the set for. Mm-hmm. And then there's another scene where a friend of the aunt gets her an audition, and she and Rita play the scene. And the audition is one of the most fantastic scenes in any movies. Like, David Lynch is really good at directing actors to act better than any other parts in the movie, really highlighting the scenes that he wants to. And that scene where she's auditioning is amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is this thing of like Hollywood, the best acted scene or the most emotional scene that has a lot of sentimentality, you know it's an audition. You see them come in, the director says, start now. And it's like riveting how it's able to pull the curtain around you and draw you in. And I think that's really, when Fisher mentions curtains, yeah, David Lynch uses a lot of curtains.
That's the scene that I'm thinking of with the actor who, yeah,
puts his arm around her.
Right. Yeah, David Lynch is also really good at directing scenes where women are like made to be put in extremely uncomfortable, compromising positions, but in such a way that it's like presenting it to you as like, well, this is sort of technically consensual, but this is the shit women deal with. I mean, there's a certain interesting feminism, I always thought, with David Lynch, with the way he does that. He seems to do that a lot. And also, I mean, he just generally has strong female leads in most of his shit that I can think of. I mean,
I don't know about Blue Velvet.
Oh, yeah, okay. Never mind. It's Inland Empire and Mulholland Drive both have a cast of...
He really likes damsel in distress.
Yeah,
archetypes.
but at the same time, his obsession of like sadist subversion like really makes you think about the damsel in distress archetype in a certain way, I think.
Yeah. At the same time, there is an underground, corrupt, underworld figure who's the people that tried to assassinate Rita. They're making the director put in a specific actress into a movie, and then they ruin the director's life.
Right.
And Justin Theroux plays a director who's cuckolded by his wife, which is interesting because in the second half, he's the opposite.
Well,
No, banda. There is no band. Il n'est pas d'orchestra. This is all a tape recording. No, banda, and yet we hear a band.
All right, so I think this is the fun part of this essay where he talks about the standard interpretation of Mulholland Drive and the offbeat interpretation of Mulholland Drive, which he brings up as sort of two interesting theories on this movie, and I think that will lead us into Inland Empire.
This whole movie is built up to a very superficially coherent plot of, okay, this lady shows up with retrograde amnesia, and she's working together with the friend she met to figure out who she is. We have, goals, we have characters, etc., etc. And about halfway through the movie, they go to this creepy little theater show that
Club Silencio
that Mark Fisher discusses. Then the lady remembers, oh yeah, I have this box with a key in it. They turn the key, they both disappear from the house, and then the entire movie shifts, and Betty wakes up in a bed, and she's no longer named Betty.
Right.
And there's an entire second half of the movie where all the characters have different names, different roles. The formerly cuckolded director is now cuckolding Betty. All these veneers of, Betty, who's now named Diane, is no longer this innocent Midwesterner, but this lifelong jaded LA resident actress. And it's basically this entire switchover in the second part. And notably, Diane hires some hitmen to kill Camilla, who was in the first half of the movie. That was Rita. Hires some hitmen to kill her, and then shoots herself in the head. And that's kind of the second part of the movie.
Yeah.
So there's a standard interpretation of this that is essentially it is Diane's dream that she is dreaming of this idealized version of herself that is Betty, who is innocent of all these things, who Rita, Camilla, is hopelessly in love with and is relying on as her savior and protector. And meanwhile, this director, who in the second half of the movie is in fact engaged to Camilla, everything bad is happening to him, and he's just this stupid loser. And that is her dream world, and then at some point she wakes up to the real world where she's actually this horrible person who's murdering this woman that she loves because she can't be with her. That's a very standard interpretation, but it's only an interpretation. We're never told that happens in the movie. We're just shown these two seemingly diametrically opposed halves, and these two very different stories.
Fisher's interested in this because he read a second online review by Timothy Takamoto called Double Dreams in Hollywood, which points out that standard interpretation is a theory, but maybe we can posit a second theory, which is that they're both dreams. What if it's all a dream and the dream is just split between these two characters, and that there's actually a third dreamer dreaming of Betty and Diane, and that we can see this being sort of a Finnegan's Wake, Ulysses, or even a Eyes Wide Shut, where the whole thing is a dream. It's considered a dream, or at least the majority of it is considered a dream. But you have other movies that the whole thing is done through a dream, and this is positing that these are two separate dreams made by a third off-camera person.
Yeah, and there's kind of as pointed out, the quote-unquote real world has a level of hyper-reality to it and certain fantastical elements in their own right that is indicative of the Lynchian style, but also does bring into question as to well, if this is the real world, it's also a kind of bizarre world.
And I think that it's sort of set up to kind of play with you in that way, where it does seem like Naomi Watts' character as Diane is like so destitute, right? She's down on her luck and an addict, and she's like dealing with all of this like revenge killing, and that I think really does make it seem like that's more real. It's a more authentic feeling, but when you look at it, it's like, oh, why is this kind of destitute person thinking that this other big actress is in love with her?
It's unclear whether she actually had a real affair with this person or whether it's a played out fantasy. But, you know, if they did actually in the past have an affair, it's kind of interesting if that isn't also some escapist notion of hers. It seems like she's someone who is a working actress. She has her jobs. Nothing's going to break through and make her get big. She's barely affording to live in the shitty place she is, and she's nursing a pretty hefty drug addiction.
And Fisher's not sold on this, both are dreams necessarily. He says whether or not this view is correct, I think that Takamoto is right to argue that there are two scenes in Mulholland Drive which merit particular attention. The scene about dreams in the diner and the scene in Club Silencio. In the diner scene, there's like a man talking to a psychiatrist, and he's telling him about a dream he had sitting in the diner. And in the dream, he dreamed of a demon behind the garbage.
Yeah, there was a demon in the back by the dumpsters.
And then to prove that the dream isn't reality, they go behind the dumpsters and the guy faints, and there seems to be a demon behind the dumpster.
It's one of those scenes that kind of definitely defies a straightforward interpretation of the movie, because assuming the standard interpretation, that scene is just out of place and doesn't fit into the plot. There's none of the main characters are in it. None of the main characters witness it. It just sort of, it's very tacked on to the beginning of the movie, similar to, you know, even the diner scene in Pulp Fiction, although that eventually gets brought back to bear when it's later revealed, oh yes, the main characters are in the diner. That doesn't happen here. But yeah, it's a very strange scene. In fact, the dream he keeps having, this recurring dream, that he's specifically in the diner talking to his shrink, and then he says like, oh yeah, and then you're standing over there by the cash register, and he looks up and his shrink is standing over there by the cash register, and just like the things start falling in place where it becomes more and more like his dream, and then it culminates into them going out back and there's a dude in a scary monster suit that scares him.
It's worth noting that in the second half of the movie, Diane, that's where she pays the hitman to try to kill Camilla.
So yeah, it's unclear that those characters are in there at the time,
but I think as what we're going to talk about in the eerie section a lot more, a lot of the eerie chapters have this enchanted placiness to them, like that places themselves have this enchanted power to act upon the characters. And I think in this case, the diner acts as this, not necessarily a portal, because the portal is Club Silencio, but more of a mystical place that you can find in every single Lynch movie. Because he loves diners. I mean, half of Twin Peaks is just sitting in a diner scheming.
Famously so. Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe even there's a certain interest there where, you know, it appears real and then it turns into a dream, and then in the second instance it's sort of the gritty David Peace realness of, you know, just disgusting people hiring hitmen to
do the underground stuff.
Right. And then we have Club Silencio, which is our curtains in our curtains and holes.
Yeah, Club Silencio is a fantastic scene. I played a little clip there, but Rita and Betty dress up as not themselves. They put on wigs, they go to Club Silencio, they sit down, and
Rita has a specific memory of this place called Club Silencio that she thinks perhaps this will help me figure out who I am.
And they go there, and it's immediately like this magician carnival atmosphere. There's a vaudeville Spanish accented actor.
Ladies and gentlemen, you shall be
Hi, bandada.
in a world of wonder, and wonders is with worlds, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's very theatrical, and there's this giant red curtain.
Yeah, classic vaudeville stage setup. And it's basically, instead of exposition, the part where the exposition would normally come in, the part where you would somehow be signaled, okay, this is the dream world, then we're going to wake up and go into the real world. Instead, David Lynch just, like, has characters say, like, all things that are real are not real, and all things that are not real are also not real.
This is a recording. There's no band. And then he brings out people who are playing trumpets, and then they put down their trumpets, but the music keeps playing. And then there's a singer that comes out and plays a Roy Orbison song in Spanish, and it's one of the most riveting performances. Again, another one of those very saccharine, sentimental moments that really captures you. And then she passes out, but the voice continues to sing the song because it's all a recording. Careful listeners who are Patreon people will remember this from our Zizek. Zizek talks about this in Pervert's Guide to Cinema, where he talks about the voice living on past. And here Fisher's pointing out that this pulls the veil and surprises us. Unlike Lovecraft, who never surprises us, there's not a lot of surprise to the weird. But here, David Lynch, despite telling us there's no band and it's all a recording, it manages to kind of shock us.
Yeah, I mean, it uses the unreality as part of the delivery of the emotional impact of the art. Fisher, explicitly compares it to Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe painting. It's a very high concept modernist, postmodernist presentation. In the movie, kind of serves as the expository transition point as much as there is one for them to get into the second half of the movie, which is again, different story. I won't comment whether they're waking up from a dream or not, but it's, the second mode of the movie. And also it's David Lynch very expressly beating us over the head with his hyper postmodern themes of your reality is an illusion, what you've seen so far is not real, but you've seen it anyway, and it is something despite its non-reality.
Fisher, to wrap up the section, talks about the formal weirdness. Ultimately, Mulholland Drive is perhaps best read as something which cannot be made to add up. That is not to say that the film should just be considered fair game for any possible interpretation. Rather, it is to say that any attempt finally to tie up the film's convolutions and impasses will only dissipate its strangeness, its formal weirdness. The weirdness here is generated in part by the way that the film feels like a wrong version of a recognizable Hollywood film type. Roger Ebert remarked that, quote, "There is no solution. There may not even be a mystery. It could be that Mulholland Drive is the illusion of a mystery. We are compelled to treat it as a solvable enigma, to overlook its, quote, wrongness, its intractability, in the same way that in Club Silencio, we are compelled to overlook the illusory nature of the performance." And I think that nicely finishes off Mulholland Drive, and we'll take a short break and come back and talk about Inland Empire.
This is a donut. It is very sweet and very good. But if you'd never tasted a donut, you wouldn't really know how sweet and how good a donut is if you'd never had that experience. Transcendental meditation is like that. Transcendental meditation gives an experience much sweeter than the sweetness of this donut. It gives the experience of the sweetest nectar of life, pure bliss consciousness. As Maharishi says, those who don't know, they don't know. Those who know, they enjoy. I hope this following documentary gives you some good news about the sweetness of life.
You have a new role to play, I hear.
Up for a roll.
No, I definitely heard that you have it. Action.
Damn! This sounds like dialogue from our script.
Cut it. What the bloody hell's going on?
Is this good? Oh, please.
Our producers know the history of this film, and they've taken it on themselves not to pass on that information to us. Purposefully.
Something's wrong. Do you love me?
It's a story that happened yesterday, but I know it's tomorrow.
Don't you remember anything? How it was?
All right. That was the trailer for Inland Empire.
Yep, a movie about the seductive pole. Yeah, so I think Fisher's first sentence opening this section up will kind of be a driver for essentially what we're going to say, which is this movie's really weird and weirder than Mulholland Drive. In Lynch's 2006 film, Inland Empire, it is as if the kind of slippages, incoherencies, and conundrums we saw in Mulholland Drive are pushed much further, to the point where there is no longer even a prospect of tractability. Yes.
I spent the afternoon watching it because it's 3 hours long, and from what I got, in the first half hour of the film, there's a crying prostitute watching a rabbit movie. There is a Polish woman telling Nikki Grace, who is played by Laura Dern.
My second favorite name to say after Todd Rundgren.
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern.
She got the part immediately before Laura Dern gets a part for a movie.
Isn't it before her audition? Like, isn't it, I'm going in for the audition? No, you have the part. Or is it right after?
In, like, the following scene, she's celebrating with people when she gets a phone call from the director.
I see, okay.
Who's Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
But this Polish woman has some clairvoyance, and that's sort of a running theme throughout the movie. Particularly female characters have the ability to see the either immediate future or 2 hours into the movie. They basically foreshadow either the scene that's about to happen or scenes that'll happen 40 scenes from now.
In many ways, it's like David Lynch's movie Dune, which also has psychic women.
Nikki Grace gets the part. What part does she get? She gets the character of Sue Blue for the movie On High in Blue Tomorrows, where she is the lead role next to Justin Theroux, who was also in Mulholland Drive as the director we mentioned before. He is playing Devin Burke, an actor playing Billy Side. And Jeremy Irons is directing the movie, and Laura Dern, Justin Theroux, and Jeremy Irons, and Harry Dean Stanton, They sit down and do a table read of the movie. There's like a phantom that Justin Theroux sees. And yeah, that was very much like Mulholland Drive, where almost the whole time in the first part of the movie, they're like intentionally doing bad acting by good actors, and then they sit down and do the table read, and they're really good at acting just on that table read.
Yeah, or at least stylized kind of.
Yeah.
They have that Lynchian, like, homely, well, golly gee style, except when they're sitting down at the table.
I'd say it's like there's this melodramatic, like, acting pause that they have to them that really hypes up their stylization that lets you know we're acting right now.
Right.
And the rest of the movie, it's very intentionally like, we're trying not to show that we're acting.
Oh, okay. So I'm just curious what you mean by bad acting.
Like there's a hamminess, like
so
it's
like
intentionally...
Twin Peaks?
Yeah. Like
okay.
The actors are off cue. They're even doing like, yeah, you know...
Yeah,
you really like her ass.
Well, I mean, you know, there's albeit a character in a movie within a movie named Sue Blue. So, like, you know, it's a general David Lynchian, like, humor in the way he likes to.
And so she's starring in this movie with Justin Theroux, and they start filming scenes of the movie. And you're never clued in when it's filming or not until the cameras pull back. But on camera, there's a relationship. Off camera, this is the scene where they're intentionally bad acting, especially noticeable. One of Justin Theroux's friends is like, man, I know you shouldn't have sex with her because bad things are gonna happen. You shouldn't have an affair with her. She's married. I know her husband. Bad things will happen if you have an affair with her. And that's like off stage. And then on camera, they're having an affair. Then they start having an affair off camera. And that's when the movie starts losing its binary between this is a movie shot on a movie.
Right. So it plays off of, I think, a similar theme if you caught our Patreon, is Scanner Darkly, based on the Philip K. Dick novel as well as the film itself, where that movie used this like locus as the undercover cop of the idea of getting lost in your role, having to play one thing in one context, play a different thing in another context, and having those two roles converge and get enmeshed. From the audience perspective, it's generally clear what's going on. Whereas this movie, Inland Empire, it plays with those same themes, except in this case it's, you know, specifically an actress who is literally playing a role who her life begins to mirror the beats of the role, i.e. she is in the movie having an affair with a man, and in quote-unquote real life, tentatively calling it that, she is having an affair with her co-star who is that man in the movie. But like very quickly it gets to a point where it really seems like they're trying to make the audience just as confused as Laura Dern about when a movie is being filmed, when it's not being filmed. Like you said, there's like often these rug pull scenes where they'll literally in the middle of something shout cut and pull the camera back, and you'll suddenly be like, oh, that was a movie. But before similar contextualizations were done to, you know, suggest this was outside of the movie. And all this is not getting into the time loops, the complete and total changes of scenery and what have you. And I mean, you've alluded to the psychic women. There is a Greek chorus of ladies of the evening that essentially like gather in an apartment and comment on things occasionally.
Yeah.
There's...
Okay, so what I want to talk about is, yes, there's a binary between movie, not movie. The sex workers, the group of prostitutes, are specifically in present time in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that scene where they're doing the table read and Justin Theroux sees a shadow or a phantom on set, Jeremy Irons turns to both of them and says, I didn't let you know about this, but it's actually a remake. And they're like, whoa, I don't do remakes.
Yeah, the weirdest idea that anyone in Hollywood has this as a rule.
I wouldn't have taken this up if I knew it was going to be a remake.
Apparently this was an ethical stand some people used to take. I don't know why.
And Jeremy Irons is like, we didn't know either until just recently, and we would have told you sooner. But it was originally a German film called 47, based on a Polish folk tale. And the German film never finished being made because it was cursed. The movie was cursed, and both actors in the movie died.
Yeah.
And so it was never made, and we're trying to remake it. And that's like a trope of like horror movies.
The idea of a cursed production is certainly a thing within the very superstitious world of people who act on both stage and screen.
Yeah.
And probably has been since the Greek times or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, so there's this ontological confusion for Laura Dern, whether or not she's the Sue Blue or Nikki Grace gets confused. And then it seems to be On High and Blue Tomorrows, it bleeds into 47.
Right. So as much as you have the level of real life, the level of the film that they're making in the present, and then that bleeds in kind of to the old film that was made / Polish folktale itself.
Yeah, the Polish folktale, or at least the attempt to make the original movie.
Because they end up going to Poland. And by they, I mean the eye of the camera, not like necessarily any of the characters. Like
and it's all in black and white.
We, as the audience, end up going to Poland quite extensively in the movie. If people have not seen this movie, I think the thing to get across, it's considered one of David Lynch's more abstract films, more difficult films, whatever you want to call it. But in many ways, it feels like this could have just been written like World on a Wire or The Matrix, where you have these ontologically clear hierarchies of here's a dream world, here's a real world. Maybe there's a twist halfway through where we learn that what we've been watching was a dream up until now. But it's clear there's a progression, and it feels like almost the movie could have been written that way, and then David Lynch just excised that connective tissue that explained all that to the audience, but otherwise left the movie mostly intact. This movie, as you said, the first half hour generally follows a pretty clear narrative. After that, it feels like there are 4 different movies being shown to you simultaneously in 3 to 5 minute scenes apiece, not put in any discernible chronological order.
Yes.
I think is the easiest way to describe what is on screen.
And the most ironic thing about the way it's set up is the most clarifying thing is when they pull the camera out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like when they're getting, like, they're playing the fucking high notes, and then this just kind of brings us back to the floor kind of thing. Where all of a sudden, for a minute, you're like, oh, I get it now, and then you're like, wait, no, I don't.
Yeah, so what happens is Laura Dern is on the street of Hollywood Boulevard walking with the prostitutes and the homeless, and she's walking in like a mini skirt, and a woman comes up to her as foreshadowed in the beginning of the film with a screwdriver and pushes it into her stomach. And she falls down and she's bleeding out, and these 3 people, there's an Asian woman and a black woman and a man, and they're sitting there and they just start having a conversation about Pomona, California.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
As Laura Dern is dying right there. And they're just having like a normal conversation about how long it takes to get to Pomona. Laura Dern is giving the performance of her lifetime, giving this very dramatic, Oscar award-winning death scene where she's slowly dying and you can practically see the blood draining out of her, and she is like retching on the ground, and it is so horrifying and also so humanizing to these people at the same time, that they're both indifferent to her death, but also you're like, wow, these people have interesting lives that they're talking about, and I haven't heard this perspective before, and the camera kind of makes you forget about Laura Dern for a bit, and then it trains back on her, and then they pull the camera away, and Jeremy Irons yells cut, and Laura Dern stays laying there.
Right.
The other actors and actresses get up and walk away, and then Jeremy Irons just goes, Nikki Grace, everyone, the greatest actress we've ever had. And the whole staff just starts like applauding for her. And she gets up and she's like, who am I?
Yeah.
Such a riveting scene.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of movies about making movies, almost a tropey amount, but there must be movies about the concept of getting lost in your role. Well, I was even thinking Black Swan. Black Swan is probably a more grounded version of Inland Empire in a lot of ways, just in the sense of it is about obsession with an art form, I guess, but it does have this losing yourself in the role, blah, 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 blah. It's just not as confusing. But it does have these scenes where you're just like, all right, you know what, whatever, just show whatever the fuck you want to show me. Like, fine, I'll watch this now. Oh, they're in Lodz, which I guess is pronounced Lynch or something.
They're in Poland.
And then all of a sudden they yell cut, and you're like, almost it's a beat that reminds you enough of like M. Night Shyamalan, where you're like, oh, they've revealed the twist, and then you like think about it for 3 more seconds, and you're like, oh, I didn't. Like, none of this makes sense still.
My favorite thing about the many sex workers is they just, you call them Greek chorus, they do literal like chorus lines. They do the locomotion at one point. They do a dance number to end out the movie.
Yeah.
We explain the movie, and I think maybe listening to Lynch talk about
is a good interview.
Process of making this movie is very, I wouldn't say enlightening, because it doesn't really tell you what it's about, but it tells you the process by which he made it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say enlightening, because it's like exactly what I guessed. But,
you're a good guesser.
And introduce Mr. David Lynch.
Normally, you write a script, and a script is based on ideas if it's an original script. And so you try to catch ideas, and if the whole thing doesn't unravel in one idea, you get fragments. And then when you get a fragment of an idea, you write it down. And then you get another idea and you write it down, and hopefully one day you have a finished script. On this particular film, I would get an idea, write it down, and then go shoot it. And so I didn't know if a whole thing would emerge. I didn't know how this scene, then I get another idea, write that and shoot that, and it doesn't, I don't know how one relates to the other. But it didn't really bother me. I just kept doing that until one time it kind of started unfolding how they all related. The same process is in a script, but now the pieces have been shot up to that point. And then it goes faster because it draws in many things, and you can roll along. Laura stuck with me, and in the beginning it was mostly Laura and some Polish people in Łódź, Poland. And then so Laura, we'd work on, like, say, the first scene and talk, and there was a character there.
David Lynch is working on a high vibration, and I mean that in this interview, he holds his hand up next to his face and vibrates his hand, and I feel like in that moment he's reaching extra frequencies.
Yeah, I was mostly hoping that you could extract 3 or 4 movies from it, but also maybe even not that. Maybe it is just scenes that David Lynch thought of separately, and then is like, well, they all go together.
It has an almost Burroughs-esque way of making things. Like, he has his famous cut-up technique where he would take literal pieces of text and cut it up and then put it together.
Yeah, this is a very cut-up technique movie. This feels a lot like a cut-up technique movie.
Like The Soft Machine, The Ticket That Exploded. It has that 60s sensibility of ripping up and destroying ideas as quickly as they're made, but also keeping all the good ones, and then like first thought, best thought, but then we have to rearrange it in as, you know, semi-coherent way as possible and let other people find the beauty in it.
Yeah.
Fisher.
Anyway, so going off title of the chapter again, Curtains and Holes. As we said, Curtains was Mulholland Drive, and Holes is Inland Empire. Fisher notes the rabbit warren-like structure of the movie. That is a reference to the featuring of David Lynch's short film Rabbits, which featured in parts in Inland Empire. Rabbits itself is a bizarre, dark satire of a family sitcom starring people who are inexplicably in rabbit suits who say shit like,
I could hear it also.
Thanks, Rabbit.
When it happens, you will know it.
Right. So, yeah, it's basically this little fucking short film David Lynch made of this imagined sitcom setup of rabbits in business attire saying weird non sequiturs over ominous music, and then occasionally having a laugh track. And that pops up in this movie like it's a thing people are watching on TV and shit.
It's what the crying prostitute is
Yes,
watching.
it's what the crying prostitute in the beginning is watching. He also identifies the cigarette hole burned into a piece of cloth, which, if I remember correctly, kind of has this transition wipe about it, where the camera zooms into the hole and it sort of wipes into transitioning to another thing, similar to the curtains in Mulholland Drive. So there's a lot of, Fisher identifies holes as this conduit of transition, similar to the curtains, possibly as a difference between the curtains. Going off of the rabbit warren-like structure, it suggests a more fluid transition, perhaps, than a definitive curtain between one world and another. A hole can lead into a tunnel, which might come out next to where it started, or...
Does he say the word rhizomatic?
Yes, he does say the word rhizomatic. That's
the connectors in a hellish rhizome in which any part can potentially collapse into any other.
Yeah. Classically, in the
Deleuzian
sense, this is a postmodern film.
Which I think the entire weird section has been going from the modern to the postmodern, so it makes sense that this is where we end up.
Yeah, rhizomatic, body without organs. It's a good way. It's this very notion of untetheredness that Lynch is chasing.
Which are ideas that he seems to view as like butterflies, and he just has a butterfly catcher and he's just got to go and catch them.
Right.
He's the complete idealist.
Yeah, in many ways it could be like a set of vignettes, but you're just not told when we're transitioning, and also maybe the vignettes have a unified plot line that explains them all. As we said, it's grounded in this story of a woman in trouble, that woman being an actress who gets her life confused with her movie. Beyond that, it's about a bunch of other things too, I assume.
Yeah, and he gets into the ontological hierarchies, as you mentioned before. The film appears at first to be an actress, Nikki Grace, who is to play a character Sue, but there is no stability to these personae, nor to the hierarchy which would treat Sue as, quote, less real than Nikki. By the end, Sue appears to have subsumed Nikki and seems not to be inside in any film that would be called On High in Blue Tomorrows. Reflexivity without subjectivity, that perfect description of the unconscious, is a phrase that is exceptionally apt for Inland Empire's convulsions and involutions. Yeah, I think going back to Freud actually has a nice poetic thing too, because we started in the introduction with Freud and the uncanny, and here he's pointing to the way in which this film is capturing the unconscious, and I guess, as you said, like body without organs. There's drive and desire, but there's no real subjectivity to that drive and desire.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least stable subjectivity.
Right, right.
The last bit I'll say that he kind of runs through in almost every chapter here is this attention to architecture. The architecture of the mind, the architecture of, even when we talk about Lovecraft, talk about architecture.
Cyclopean architecture.
And H.G. Wells, The Door in the Wall. In the K-Punk article where he talks about Inland Empire, he says that this is like a movie version of A Door in the Wall over and over and over again. And that these are two movies in which he sees this weird threshold constantly being, you're going into a new world. And in this film, you just keep going into a new world as the world develops. Mm-hmm. And in H.G. Wells' A Door in the Wall, you have one door and one other world. And in this one, you have multitudes.
Yes.
I think starting and ending on architecture, starting and ending on the mind, I think that kind of has a poetic coherence to this whole weird section, which it's a dense section, and I think it's very enjoyable and made me think about weird a lot differently.
Yep.
So we're gonna probably take a couple weeks off in between the weird and the eerie sections, but we'll be back at you in the new year if you're listening as these come out. So yeah, check us out with the next section, Approaching the Eerie.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about the eerie.
See you next time.
Oh, Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Cinnamon, where you gonna run to?